believing that you've learned something when you haven't actually digested any evidence, any material.
Throw in a few infographics, throw in a
Yeah.
few little trendy ways to present
Mhm.
something, and suddenly you're vegan for a month, you know? Hello and welcome back to The Secret Knowledge. My name is Shane.
I'm Allyson.
And today we are talking about the third episode of the Gaia series covering Steven Greer. This episode was called
Project Starlight.
Project Starlight, and you know, it was more focused than the previous two episodes.
Yeah, I really had trouble tracking the sentences of the last episode. I mean, it felt like word salad to me.
And there were some parts of this episode where I kind of was getting a little overwhelmed, but I appreciated how this episode mostly sticks around the early 90s, early, mid, and late 90s, where Steven Greer is operating his initial attempt at disclosure, which was called Project Starlight. And it kind of stays there. It doesn't veer off too far into other directions. Steve stays on track. I actually kind of noticed, I don't know if you noticed this, he sounded a little hoarse at the start of this episode.
I didn't notice that he sounded hoarse.
I thought he was sounding a little bit
I hope
tired.
he's not under the weather.
I hope he's not either. But yeah, so it covers Project Starlight. Where did you want to start with this one?
Well, okay, so in the previous two episodes, I had kind of set some goals for what I was hoping to get out of a new series with Steven Greer. I believe that I wanted to know if it was going to be a 10-part commercial for his CSETI conference, and at least in a couple of these episodes, we seem to be focusing on other elements of his disclosure project. So I do appreciate that. Another thing that I wanted to see if what would happen was if he was going to address any of the counter arguments against some of the evidence that he presents in his documentaries, and at least we have an attempt to address some of those counter arguments. I think I want to discuss the problems with his counter arguments, but I do appreciate that they're at least brought to the forefront, albeit fairly briefly, and I would continue to argue misleadingly, but that's something I wanted and it's something I got, so I'm happy about that.
I was pretty surprised to hear that question asked. I guess to lead up to that, the setup is basically this. Greer claims that in the early 90s, when he had started to do some CE5 stuff, that the government began to take notice of him, is sort of the setup to this whole situation. He kind of quickly claims that there was a turning point where he stopped talking with government officials and was approached basically by men in black, which is like, hey, we're behind the government. We're behind the financial systems of the world. We work with Jesuit priests to distribute technology around the world. And anything that you say, basically, we already know about. Don't fuck with us.
And I think that's further set up by him establishing that even President Clinton was denied access to these special projects. Something that I believe could happen, that presidents are not given access to all top secret information. I think that's something that we can, pretty well assume is true. But that leads us to the fact that, of course, Steven Greer doesn't have access to government officials. It would have to come from somewhere else.
Right, and it moves into a zone where it's difficult to substantiate what Greer is claiming. I can tell you that when I walked to CVS yesterday, some men in black pulled up to me in a van and told me whatever I want to say. It's tough when that's the direction he goes in. And I feel like we had a comment on our previous episode where someone said a lot of things Greer says about the government is true.
Mm-hmm.
And my worry with comments like that is I do feel like Greer panders to a pretty common conspiracy, not just throughout today, but throughout all time, which is like there's a shadow government, there's a new world order being built, and like these men in black, as he described them, were very like, we have our hands in literally everything. So,
and I think that's an explanation to a certain degree of Greer's popularity, despite some of the problems with the media that he produces. I mean, watching his documentaries, they're often very difficult to follow. The evidence that he says he's going to give isn't often given clearly or at all. So it is his appeal to our distrust of government, which I think almost everyone has. I mean, I think we'd be hard pressed to find an individual that's like, yes, the government is always acting in our self-interest and is always giving us the information that we should have. I mean, I think it would be difficult to find a single person that isn't
somewhat skeptical of the government. And yeah, I guess I'd never seen Greer. Like, I'd always known Greer was preying upon that fact, but I guess until just now when you said, like, everyone kind of has that level of distrust, I've never realized how ubiquitous Steven Greer's appeal could be just because he leans so heavily into that particular aspect. So should we just talk about how he defends himself?
In episode 1 in our 3-part series on Steven Greer's documentary Unacknowledged, you uncovered a particular piece of evidence that seemed to pretty clearly show that he was misrepresenting some major evidence that he had that led us to believe that the government already accepts the fact that there are aliens and they're directly trying to keep regular individuals from accessing that information. Do you want to talk a little bit of that just to kind of summarize the information that you found?
So the thing that Greer says often is that he was allowed to brief the director of the CIA, James Woolsey, at the time, the director, and that he told him about the way that they travel through space. He claims that Woolsey and his wife were very inquisitive, asked a lot of questions, as if Greer was the one bringing this information to them for the first time. I don't think this is the same scenario, but there's another disclosure Greer talks about that brings him to tears when he recalls it in a different movie. But that's the scenario in Greer's eyes, which is that he was asked to debrief the head of the CIA.
And that's how
aliens.
He presents it in Unacknowledged. And then we found some evidence to the contrary that he didn't address in that documentary.
Yes, which is a letter signed by Woolsey and his wife, as well as this guy named John L. Peterson and his wife, who I'm going to double back on in a second. But the letter basically says that was not a briefing, that was not an official intelligence meeting, that was a dinner party. We politely asked you questions. We sat with you and let you speak whatever you wanted to talk about, but that was not a briefing.
In the letter, they specifically say that you mistook our politeness as acquiescence and our questions as affirmations, which is to say, yes, we were speaking with you about these things, but we didn't say that we were going along with everything that you presented to us. We didn't promise to agree with you. We were just listening.
And one of the things that Greer said in this Gaia series that communicates to me, I mean, there's always two options with Greer. There's either one, he's misrepresenting things and he knows he is, or two, he's actually misunderstanding things and he's not in touch with reality.
Right.
I can't say which one it is. But Greer points out in this episode, he goes, it was actually, he doesn't call her Susan, he calls her Sue. He goes, it was actually Sue who asked such a good question, wondering how aliens are able to communicate over light years of distance.
Specifically, he says that she had the insight to ask me, how are they communicating across these vast distances?
And let's just imagine we're at this dinner party right now and Steven Greer is at the table. What I think happened was Steven had probably just been talking for like 10 fucking minutes about something and being polite. Susan Woolsey probably said, Dr. Greer, how are the aliens able to do this? Like, just entertaining what he said, just asking him a question, just being polite.
Right. And when I think of how the quote-unquote dinner party that I'm attending, which I would say is something akin to UFO Twitter, when I'm having conversations with people that are making unsubstantiated claims, my first mode of discussion is, okay, you're making a pretty drastic claim right now. Can you point me to the evidence, or can you at least explain the process that you're referring to in such a way that I can follow it? So it makes sense to me that Susan Woolsey was like, back up. How are you arriving here?
Right. And so that's the case that's laid out by Woolsey and company in this letter, which is you misrepresented what had happened. But Greer says to Billy Carson, I have my evidence that this was not a dinner party.
Right. He's like, ha ha ha. Little did they know, I save everything. I saved the letter from John L. Peterson speaking to the contrary, that it wasn't a dinner party, that it was a briefing.
And yet, what does the letter say?
The letter says it's a dinner party. So if he's not referring to a different letter, in which case I don't understand why that wouldn't be the letter that they're flashing on, that they're panning over on screen in this series on Gaia. Why aren't you showing us that letter? So if the letter that he's claiming is proof that it was something other than a dinner party and it was actually an official briefing, why does that letter say that it's a dinner party?
There's a few weird things about this letter, and I'm actually going to dig into this a little bit, maybe to the benefit of Greer. So there's a letter from John L. Peterson.
Mm-hmm. Okay, I'm actually just going to go ahead and read a couple paragraphs from the letter that is establishing that the dinner party is going to happen. And this is, once again, by John L. Peterson to Steven Greer, December 3rd, 1993. For context, what I know about John L. Peterson is that he is a self-purported futurist. He's an aviator and a veteran, and he started, what is it called, the Arlington Project?
The Arlington Institute.
The Arlington Institute.
Which I'm going to get into more in a second.
Oh, okay. Well, I'll be interested. I don't know what you're going to say about that. So the letter reads, the first two paragraphs. I talked to Woolsey this morning, and he suggested getting together over dinner. Getting together over dinner. He was not aware of your organization or that anyone was planning such an announcement. He seemed genuinely surprised. This almost certainly means that 1, there's an active attempt being made at lower levels of government to sabotage Project Starlight. 2, the group almost certainly has tapped your phones and is aware of most of the details of your plans. 3, they are feeding information gathered from their collection, parenthetical, like the fact that you might be meeting with Woolsey, in parenthetical, back to you in a negative way. And 3, there's no Aquarian group.
There's 2 number 3s in this paragraph. Did you notice that?
I did not notice that.
Again, I'm going to speak more about John L. Peterson in a moment, but just for everyone to know, there are 2 number 3s.
In this first paragraph, a couple of things that I want to draw your attention to is that Woolsey suggested getting together over dinner. That doesn't sound like Woolsey suggested a briefing. He suggested getting together over dinner. 2, he wasn't aware of the organization prior to this, so it makes sense that he wants to have just an entry-level conversation into Greer and what he's doing. Mm-hmm. I don't think that necessarily proves that he believes Steven Greer or that he wants to embark on some type of project with Steven Greer related to disclosure. And it says 3, that you might be meeting with Woolsey. That doesn't sound like anything official. It might be with a meeting, not a scheduled meeting, just a meeting up with. Paragraph 2. Up until now, you have been an interesting operation that these folks in government have been keeping an eye on, etc. Except for the fact that they just said that Woolsey wasn't previously aware of his organization. Okay. If we do have dinner with Jim, a.k.a. James Woolsey, we will have moved this whole thing to a much, much higher plane, and doing so raise significant red flags for those who don't want this to succeed. If we have dinner with Jim, not when we go to the scheduled briefing. If we have dinner with Jim. Operation Starlight will become a serious threat to the status quo in the same way that you wouldn't volunteer all of your most detailed plans to one of the most inflammatory members of the UFO ghetto, knowing that he or she would use to work against your ends. So you must not volunteer sensitive information to others that would have similar objectives. So I don't know what the Aquarium Project is. I don't know what every detail in this letter is referring to. It's clearly a private, personal letter. But what this does show us is that this isn't an established meeting. This is, if it happens, if this person who isn't already familiar with your work wants to get together with you, this is the information that he flashed on the screen to be a counter argument to the fact that Woolsey's letter saying that it wasn't a meeting, that it was just a dinner party, is misleading. I don't understand how this, he doesn't explain. That's why I don't understand. He doesn't actually, he flashes the letter, but he doesn't quote the letter. He doesn't support it with any type of textual evidence. He just leaves it there. He says it does one thing, and he doesn't show how it does that one thing. So without him explaining that to me, I don't understand why I'm supposed to take this piece of evidence as support to the fact that it counters the fact that Woolsey was having a meeting, a briefing, not just a casual dinner.
That's very well said. Like he claims it's going to be this piece of evidence that does this certain thing. Not only does it not do that just in its substance, but he himself doesn't expound upon it for us.
Right. It's just left there. Yeah. And my closing thought on this is that in the letter that Woolsey wrote, sort of saying, hey, Greer, you're misrepresenting what this event was, the person that wrote him this letter organizing the dinner party between Greer and Woolsey signs the letter attesting to the fact that get-together wasn't a briefing, it was a dinner party. In the evidence that he's showing to like my brain can't even wrap.
Yeah, so for like I want to dig into this letter a little bit. And I don't have much. I guess you could say maybe I'm taking after Dr. Greer. I don't have much to substantiate what I'm about to say, but I'm going to do just some small conjecturing to try to figure out what this letter is and why it exists. So John Peterson, I'm just going to kind of walk through this and cut in whenever you want.
Sure.
John Peterson wrote this letter to Dr. Steven Greer. We don't know if they've already been communicating. We don't know the history of their correspondence. We know that John L. Peterson both wrote this letter to Greer, yet also signed the letter from Woolsey claiming it was a dinner party. It's an interesting detail to me. The Arlington Institute is basically a think tank, okay? Here's what I think this whole scenario is. This is 1993, I want to say.
Yes.
The World Wide Web is not commercially available to most citizens. So you can't exactly just Google Steven Greer, find out what he's all about. I feel like either John Peterson or perhaps someone in government was hearing about Steven Greer's project where he's claiming to take people out into remote areas and contact aliens. Again, this is 1993, so we can't just...
Do we know that CSETI has been established as an organization at this point?
Not necessarily CSETI, but Greer has already talked about at this point.
Right, that's true. That he's seeing tetrahedrons in France with onlookers that don't want to substantiate that.
Right. So what I'm feeling like is going on is someone wants a read on Greer. He could be doing something dangerous.
And he also, for the record, is claiming to have lots of information that is top secret. So it makes sense that government might be interested in someone who's claiming to have this information, which John Peterson says that he shouldn't disclose, right?
So I don't know who contacted who first. I don't know if maybe John Peterson is able to do contract work for the government, setting up meetings. I don't know what the hell's going on. All I know is I personally think that's the reason for this dinner party, is I think Steven Greer was maybe making some sort of wave, whether that's in government or just through other circles, and this dinner party was put together by Peterson. Did Peterson in a way betray him later by signing the Woolsey letter? I don't know. I don't know what's going on with that. A part of me thinks there's that bolded list Peterson includes, where he says, this must mean the government's tapping your thing. This must mean there's an... What this tells me is that Greer had also been writing to Peterson, because this letter is written as if there should be one before it.
Right.
Right? So how do we know that Greer didn't ask Peterson to set up this dinner party?
Right.
Because if Peterson works for a think tank that works for the government, it could have been Greer himself who specifically asked or even paid for this dinner party to be set up. I know that's a big leap, but this is clearly not the first letter in a series of correspondence. There's too much loaded information in paragraph 1 for me to believe him and Greer haven't already been having a back and forth of some kind.
Right.
So I think that's significant.
And like you said, you are saying that that's conjecture, but what I take from that, in the very least, since you are able to conjecture in that way, is in the very least, Steven Greer has not laid out who all of the players are, how this got started. We're clearly in the dark about some fundamental information about how we got from point A to point B. And once again, if your goal is to establish that aliens are real, that disclosure needs to happen, and this is being intentionally kept from us by the government, then you need to piece by piece lead us through this evidence, not just be flashing some stuff on the screen, not just giving us letters without context about who these people are, about what started this conversation. And this might be something that isn't possible in a 30-minute episode on Gaia TV.
Well, then have it be 2 episodes.
Right,
then.
right. If you don't have enough space to present the evidence in a way that it can be digested by your viewership, then you are being irresponsible with that information.
Right. And I also feel like when you just said he should have kind of labeled who the main players are or whatever, I feel like an accurate presentation of this letter might include something like, I had been in contact with John Peterson, who worked at the Arlington Institute, and I had wanted him to set up a meeting for me. The way that what Greer wants you to think is that he was contacted out of the blue by the government. I don't buy that after this whole scenario. I really don't. However, again, right after this part of the episode, Greer claims that a friend of Bill Clinton came to his house. And I think Greer is either misunderstanding or misrepresenting. But this friend of Bill Clinton says, hey, the government agrees with everything you're saying, but we can't do it ourselves because it's too dangerous.
Right, you're expendable. Which once again puts Greer as being in this position of, oh, he's so brave.
He's a martyr.
He did what other people weren't willing to do. He put his skin on the line for us and for alien disclosure.
However, I do have... if you've watched our unacknowledged video, you may remember a part where I went through all of these different quotes that appear in the movie. And there's a common theme among the quotes where the way the movie has it set up, it's positioned to where these figures of power are saying aliens are real. But when you really read the quote and look at what it's saying, it's a lot of people arguing for government transparency. And I think if Greer actually was contacted by a friend of Bill Clinton, I think what they were agreeing with was that Steven Greer wants peaceful, transparent, or open transparency and a peaceful outcome of this type of information. I think that's what they're agreeing with for Greer. And
that's something we can agree with too.
Exactly.
That's something that we could find admirable.
But what Greer says in the episodes is they're in accordance with everything I'm saying. I think they like his conceptual perfect world scenario, which is where we have transparency, no one gets hurt. If there are aliens, we have a peaceful relationship with them. But Greer takes that and sort of runs it in this weird direction. And that's just so consistent now to where every time he opens his mouth, I'm kind of asking myself, how is he either misunderstanding or blatantly misrepresenting?
Right. The next Steven Greerism I want to address is that there's a part where he says, if there's an amazing story that has no corroborating evidence, then he doesn't include it. I think this is problematic because I've seen all of Greer's content in terms of the documentaries that he's produced at this point, and that's patently false. And if he's stating that outright and saying, I mean, what is he trying to say with that statement? You can trust me. You don't need to worry about looking into things because I've already appropriately vetted all of the information that I'm presenting to you. So just kick back, relax, take me at my word. Well, I can't take you at your word because you've already futzed with everything so much prior to this point that I feel like I have to take a microscope to everything you're saying. And immediately, the first scenario that jumps to my mind about an amazing story that doesn't have corroborating evidence goes back to the documentary Sirius, where he puts the Atacama humanoid at the forefront. It's used as it's presented at the beginning of the documentary, and then we kind of touch base with it the entire way through. We go to other topics, but we're always coming back to the Atacama humanoid, which is this, how large is it? 16 inches?
I think smaller than 16 inches. It's pretty tiny.
It's a tiny, tiny skeleton. That they're arguing by the shape of the head, by the length of the fingers in proportion to everything, that it's an alien skeleton. So that's what we're led to believe at the beginning of Sirius. And when we end Sirius, they say, okay, well, we didn't find any alien DNA. In fact, what we found was human DNA that leads us to believe that this skeleton had some type of genetic condition. We're still going to keep researching this. We think there's something alien about it, but we have no evidence to the contrary. That sounds like an amazing story that doesn't have corroborating evidence that not only is a primary rhetorical device of Sirius, but he continues to flash images of this humanoid in all of his other documentaries. Well, if we're supposed to take you at your word, Greer, why do you keep flashing this image without context that seems to say it's one thing when you have no evidence saying it is that thing?
He also, in this very Gaia series, has told an outlandish story with no corroborating evidence, which is his French Alps sighting.
Oh, yeah.
He claims multiple people saw this shit, and not a single testimony could be had.
Yes, right.
So, not a photo, not a fellow student at the Maharishi meditation fun camp.
Yep. I want to go to the Maharishi meditation fun camp.
I also think... there is a man who appears in at least a couple Greer media projects. I know he appears in, is it Unacknowledged that Richard Doty shows up in?
Yeah. He's in other documentaries as well, but he's definitely a primary character in Unacknowledged.
And Richard Doty himself admits that he once was a disinformation agent.
Not anymore. He's rehabilitated.
He's rehabilitated, so we can absolutely trust him.
Yeah, everything he says from this point on, good to go. But he used to lie for a living, and he did it for the government.
And he has been in Steven Greer media projects, so it's like...
And eventually we need to do a deep dive on Doty because it's a wild ride. But for now, what we can say is that he himself has agreed that he's a disinformation agent. And
I just want to say, the first time I ever heard Richard Doty speak, I didn't trust what he was saying. Maybe it's just because he's been a liar for so long that he just talks like a liar. I don't know what it was. I just thought there was something weird about him. And he also shows up, unfortunately, in The Phenomenon, right?
Yes.
Which The Phenomenon is one of our favorite alien documentaries.
Which I've seen a few times. You've seen...
I've seen maybe like once and some change because my roommate would watch it a lot.
But, something I've learned about my analysis of evidence in everything is I personally can't trust my first view or my first read through of something. When I first watched Unacknowledged, I had a great time. I thought it was a fun ride. I didn't look at the evidence too hard. I just shut off my TV and I went about my day kind of living in this beautiful alien mythos. And that was fun. But I watched it again and it got harder to follow. I watched it again. It became clearer and clearer that what my brain was originally telling me in that first watch through, which was that it was a cohesive project all the way through, the second and third time I watched it, I realized, oh, you can't trust your brain to believe that you're actually following things in real time. That you're going to have to take a more particular lens to these sort of things.
Yeah, which is another thing, and we don't really have to go in it at length right now, but documentaries are just so good at that effect where when there's the visual on the screen and the compelling music in the background and the kind of interesting interview being given, it's just this,
and you're moving so fast.
You're moving so fast. It's kind of just this perfect recipe for
believing that you've learned something when you haven't actually digested any evidence, any material.
Throwing a few infographics, throwing a few little trendy ways to present something, and suddenly you're vegan for a month, you know? One of the last things in my notes, well, there's actually two things. Just kind of a fun tidbit is they mention a picture of Hillary Clinton leaving the Rockefeller Ranch, and Billy Carson, with such confidence, it almost made me laugh. He goes, if you look in Hillary Clinton's hands, she's reading a book about aliens. And I just thought that was like really sweet and really funny because it's just a book that happens to have stars on the back of it. I mean,
and if Billy knows with such abject certainty that it is a book on aliens, why can't you tell me what alien book it is?
Yeah, what's the title?
I want to be in the Hillary Clinton book club on aliens. I don't
know if I want to be in the Hillary Clinton book club. I don't know if I want to be in it. And then the other thing that stood out to me was Greer revisits one of my least favorite, I don't know what you would even call it, Greer ideas, which is that Marilyn Monroe was killed by the CIA Wetworks assassins because she got in an argument with Bobby Kennedy that she was going to reveal what she knew about aliens. And two things stick out about this to me. One, this occurs in like the last 5 minutes of the episode, and they go over it absurdly quickly. We get a smudgy document you can barely read. Claims to be a write-up of the things Marilyn Monroe has seen in New Mexico, or JFK told her after they fucked that these things were in New Mexico. And then they kind of just skip over it, and it's like, yeah, Marilyn Monroe was killed because of her alien knowledge, and that's about it.
I'm so glad that you had the mental bandwidth to address this because I did not. I would just like us to leave Marilyn Monroe out of things for a little while.
That's fine with me. I mean, Greer basically leaves her out of the discussion because he barely goes into it. I just wanted to say it's one of my least favorite things Steven Greer does because to me, it's this way. I feel like a lot of conspiracies dwell upon like what we lost at certain points of like American culture and like the public's ability to get past and process these things. And I feel like Greer is positioning Marilyn Monroe as like this astounding great loss that is all the more tragic because the government killed her. And it's just,
and how many things is Marilyn Monroe used for to attract our pathos? I mean, she's just slapped on everything.
Yeah, all the fucking time. So I just wanted to point out one of my least favorite Greer conjectures. It did appear in this episode, and I can only hope it does not appear again in this series, though I think it's going to.
Okay, so the last thing that I want to talk about, because I can't stop obsessing over what Billy Carson is I want to talk. I think I just have to touch base with him again because in our last episode, I said that I'd done slightly more research on Billy Carson, meaning that I'd watched a video from one of his independent projects from Greer, and I reported that he was more articulate, not in the Greer interview format, which I will maintain because we get to see a little bit more of Billy Carson's personality. He's not just simply a sounding board when he's working on one of his independent projects. But what did we learn from actually watching some videos with Billy Carson himself?
Well, I learned that Billy Carson says we have intelligent crystals that live inside our brain.
Magnetized intelligent crystals in the brain
that basically broadcasts consciousness from the universe into us.
Yes, he says that consciousness is downloaded. It's not made, right?
Yes.
So we watched a couple of his videos, one on the magnetized, one on religion, and one on crystals. And what did we learn about the way that Billy Carson presents evidence?
So, in the crystal video, which why don't we go ahead and link in the description
definitely.
below. This video begins with Billy Carson saying, "I've done a lot of research."
Mm-hmm.
And he even uses the word sources. He says, I've done a lot of research and I have these sources, and we're going to talk about crystals today. And I got to admit, I'm a fool at this point, but there was a part of me that was like, man, what if he says a cool source or like
Right.
a cool study
Right.
about crystals and their electromagnetic properties?
Mm-hmm.
Like, this could be kind of interesting. Well, the next 4 minutes is just Billy
Listing a crystal
saying the crystal's name.
and then saying that there's some testimonial, some anecdotal evidence purporting for it to have qualities. There's no source.
No source.
There's just, here's a crystal, put it under your pillow.
There's one where he says, wear it as a necklace and walk around for a little bit. There's another one he says businessmen really like.
Yes.
Because it helps them make the deal.
So watching this video in particular made it very clear why he was the person selected to interview Greer, because he also has this knack for saying, I'm going to give you a source, saying I'm going to give you evidence, and then giving some sort of shakily formatted teleprompter read off that I'm not even certain that he wrote.
You know, this reminds me too. I would say that if you look at all the questions he's asked Greer so far in the series, technically the most hard-hitting one was the dinner party question.
Mm-hmm.
Yet when you look at how Greer answered it, it was actually just yet another setup for Greer to say whatever he wanted.
Right.
In the hands of a different interviewer, you maybe say, come on, Greer, what's up with this dinner party? Greer gives his shitty answer, and then you say, no. Come on. Like, I'm imagining, not that he's the pinnacle of journalism, but I'm imagining like Howard Stern or something being like, come on, dude. Like,
it says dinner party in the letter, man. Like,
yeah.
So if it says dinner party, why it wasn't a dinner party?
Exactly. So, I don't know. Billy's content, we couldn't even finish one of his videos.
No.
I was falling asleep listening to it. It was really boring.
Well, I think upon looking into Billy a little bit more between video 1 and video 2, I had some hopes that maybe there was going to be some secret substance to Billy.
Mm-hmm.
And watching more of his videos, he just seems like a wannabe Greer character, which is to say he wants to talk about things that he knows has a certain appeal to people that aren't necessarily interested in doing some digging into some fun, comfortable belief systems.
Mm-hmm. Actually, one more thing to say about Billy. One of his videos was very against organized religion.
Mm-hmm.
He was basically saying, you've got this Bible, you've got the Quran, you've got whatever. Don't believe that stuff.
He specifically says religion is always going to be connected to money, power, and control, which isn't a statement that I disagree with.
Oh, yeah, totally true.
But do we have money or people vying for money, power, and control in these sort of spiritual New Age movements?
Absolutely.
Yes.
Especially with a fucking 10-part Greer series. I mean, we live in a town where the James River Church got a multi-million small business loan during COVID times. So we know more than anyone that religion develops money and gets money. But I look at something like Gaia and I look at a series with Greer in it. And to me, I just see the dollar signs in Greer's eyes the entire time. It's not any different. Well, I think that's all I have for episode 3, titled Project Starlight. Do you have anything else?
No, I'm glad that this one was easier to follow. I appreciated that there was at least a nod to the counter arguments. What do we have? 7 episodes left?
6 or 7. I can't remember if it's a 9 or 10 part series.
Okay, so we still have some room for Greer to potentially, if not redeem himself, but give us a little bit more textual or evidentiary support. So that's what I'm going to continue to be looking out for.
And I guess if I were to share anything here at the end, I would just say that if Greer really did want to be seen as a trustworthy person, he could have used some of these stories to say, hey, here's a time where I messed up, or hey, here's a time where I misunderstood what someone said to me, or hey, here's a time where I heard an alien story and it was totally wrong. You know, like he could be building a case through this interview. He could be becoming a multi-layered, dynamic individual, but instead everything is always, I'm the hero. The government left it to me. Bill Clinton's friend said I was the only hope. Like, he never takes that opportunity to make any of this feel real. And I just think that's too bad. You know, I'm not surprised. I wouldn't even say I'm disappointed, because I'm not surprised. But it is too bad. And
when I think about why we're doing this, I really enjoyed the first time I saw a Greer movie, but I don't like being fooled by crummy rhetorical media devices. And I think it's important in a world so saturated with media information that we kind of take a moment to slow things down, especially when people are getting increasingly popular and having increasingly more influence. So if you're out there and you've been a Greer fan, I get it. I also wanted to just take his information at face value because I love this subject matter. I enjoy it, and I ultimately want to believe, but I don't want to believe at the expense of my willingness to have to admit that I've been misled or I've been wrong about something. So I as an individual want to continue to maintain openness to the unexplained, but I want to always check myself. And for me, that's what this project came from, is that I watched Unacknowledged. I let myself fall into the dream for a little bit, and when I woke to realize that Steven Greer probably wasn't the person that he purported to be, I had to go somewhere else, and this is part of my journey somewhere else.
I think that's an amazing thesis statement for what we're doing here. We want to have open minds, but we also don't want to just willingly go down a path that is ultimately fruitless or full of misinformation. So for our next video on this Gaia series, it'll be episode number 4. And until then, please leave us a like or a dislike, a comment below, and also remember to subscribe so you don't miss our next video when it comes out.
All right. Thanks for listening, folks.
Thanks, guys. See ya.